that people are just ignoring. This the issue that leads me to one of my pet peeves. You know, we have, and I think most of the people here are subject matter specifically expert or at least specialized. Understand? We speak about decarbonization. Lose my great aunt. He understands pollution and he knows that pollution is something that can kill. So I just want to implore, as just a prelude to what I'm about to say, that generally we should try, when we're talking to non-subject matter experts, to put it down to them. Because the actions that can lead to the big wins is in their hands. And the language they understand are not subject matter expertise. So that's just my opening salvo, but you know, wonderful subject, difficult. Human rights, I've infused into it developmental rights, because I think they are in development right is as much fundamental as a human right. And Africa, and indeed Nigeria and other African countries, are challenged with developmental rights. But when you speak about just transitions, you know, there are two levels of just transition. You know, it's typical for us to, I think, the subject matter, just inequalities of those nations, the continents, and these countries. But within the country, within countries, there's an inequality that also needs to be addressed. So a just transition, a just green transition, addresses not just a world, global, regional, continental justice, but it deals with a national justice. And how, when we make international commitments, how we translate that into national action that is inclusive and that we do within our nation-state borders in a way that we are unjust to them. Just thinking of what it does to people's lives and livelihoods. It's that we just happen to be here. This is an African forum. It is actually a crying clarion call for us to start to think about ways in which we can, what I'm going to do is 15 minutes, you said. It's going to be a miracle, but I'll do it. Let's deal with some obvious things. I believe that, you know, there are certain developmental trajectories that we need to avoid. The replication of what has happened over centuries in the Western world. I'm not going to preach to this community, and the pollution that has occurred. So we believe that the time has come for a purposeful decarbonization. It's not new to us, it's not new. And sometimes it's good to refresh our memory about some of the statistics. 162 million tons of man-made global warming pollution. And Africa is not even responsible for, some say 3, some say 4% of that emission. And yet, 8.7 million people die every year from causes directly related to pollution. And some of the biggest world disasters that have taken, in some cases, 200 years. If you take slave trade, if you take the Holocaust, maybe 8, 10 years, have led to less mortality. And still, we continue to progress as if, like a slow motion wreck. I want you to think of a slow motion. So Africa, we've actually done very well in the history. I'm a bit of a historian, so I'm a historian and I'm a lawyer, so you'll see a lot of that in what I'm founded in this subject, but I have those other proclivities. You know, so Africa that concerned about to survive as nation states, really, it was, but you know, the good thing, or anybody, it was the first time that a binding treaty recognized that people are entitled to, quote, a general satisfactory environment conducive. First time an international treaty created that obligation in a charter concerning human and people's rights. So it didn't take long for Africa to declare that a pollutable environment was incompatible with human dignity. And so by 1972, in the Stockholm Conference, this is me in history, don't worry, I'll get out of history in a minute. By 1972, the Stockholm Conference on Human Environment, where African leaders emphasized that underdevelopment and environmental degradation were interconnected. Europe was still polluting. Much of growing Asia was still polluting. We were already concerned, theirs as of right. And so by global agenda, Rio arrived. And African states played, but differential desertification treaties, which I'm going to skip because he's given me a very short time. So pollution is the word, and climate has become a human rights issue. And so by Resolution 153 in the 2000s, Africa first confirmed that climate change was has a direct implication on human rights. At the time when Europe was still struggling, I look forward to the charter. We see that the structure of the charter, without going into too many principles. One, empires. We still have we're haunted by these ghosts. So 21 rightly strengthened because we're still challenged annually with our sovereignty. And so, but we guarantee the rights to development for all people, emphasizing that this development should be fair and sustainable. So there became clearly you can see a tension. There's the sovereignty, and then there's a freedom that you're trying to create at the same time. Fortunately, it resolved in Article 24, where we established both substantive and procedural reliefs. And I want to do this categorically because I'm going to come back to this just at the end. To prevent environmental damage risks to the common person. Our fancy specialist, expert, subject matter specializations, we speak above people sometimes. We've forgotten the old word. Reduce pollution and implement adaptation measures to facilitate public participation in environmental decision making. And so we intensify these obligations, internal factors only, and affect our ways of life. And I can go through the disasters, whether it is the Cyclone Ida that displaced 1.9 million people in southern Africa. Mozambique was shocked that geologists, and I'm not one of them, geographers, I'm not one of them, have it on authority that Lake Chad Basin that affects 3 countries in the West and Central Africa region has shrunk since 1960 and displaced 2.6 million people. Or should we talk more recently in Nigeria? 2002, Nigeria endured the worst floods in a decade, 110,000 hectares of farmland. So I'm not here to tell you that it's real. The earliest international obligations. But what have we resulted in? Framework without substance. Or framework with ineffective, inefficient substance. If I can take have pause. Well, what has happened? First of all, we've got some honest, and I don't care where this goes to, sector-led leadership that has been chosen wrongly, for the wrong reasons, for maybe geopolitical, maybe some, what do they call that, despotic reasons. You've got sector-led leadership that doesn't you've got finance. Cost in Africa, specifically Nigeria, the finance is not led by Western-driven negative media that we do not pay attention to. And so the political risk and all sorts of risks are thrown at you, but we need to get financing. It'll cost you don't forget. So, but I'm moving on. I've got 7 minutes. So, and I will submit the paper to Prof after so that people can interrogate it. I really think it's important to look at. I wanted to talk quickly about the bold. Africa. Then we always have framework. If you look at the Paris Agreement, and I love the preamble, when taking action to address climate change, respect and promote, consider their respective obligations on human rights. This is 2000. In fact, African Union went on to give their action plan, a 10-year action plan for 2022 to 2032. But what has happened? I don't need to tell you. What has happened to the Paris Agreement? The Finance Fund, all these things have not. So our international commitments, the Paris Agreement. I don't know, we could spend all day here. We could spend all day here. But then we'll give 20% unconditional reduction of greenhouse gases, and 47 we've not go adversely against community action. Yet we must be able to engage the possibility of increase in industries facing transition. Equitable carbon pricing strategies that recycle the revenue. It's not enough to take the revenue and say this is tax revenue. As I'm hearing, tax. We must recycle that income back in. We must scale up. Develop capacity. Look for the capacity. The capacity is in this room. I don't know how many people here are going to COP today. No obligations. While in queue. Thank you for listening.
And gentlemen, help me. Olasupo Shashore, who spoke for only 11 minutes. Please put your hands together for him. Thank you, sir. Okay, straight particular session. I have the honor and privilege to invite a Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Okay, so who's moderating this session? I'd like to welcome quickly an associate professor of law, University of Bradford and UCRI Future Leaders branches, Ruth David. Okay, please put your hands together for her as she makes her way to the stage. And finally, we have the Vice President, Commerce, Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Shijuaje Kayode. Is he here? Please put your hands together for him as well. All right, Madam Moderator, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. You're welcome. Would you like to move closer? Let me introduce myself, since I was Sunrise, and I'm also here speaking on behalf of the UN Resident Coordinator. And it's a real pleasure to be here with you today. Professor, I won't be able to do it justice. So I think he's really laid the scene, he's laid the foundation for us to really form the basis of our discussions today. Only to add that he mentioned the issue around renewable energy and transition, clean and just transition, where we heard earlier human rights and sustainable development for all, and also to address past environmental harms and to avoid causing new harms. So it's really an opportunity to reshape our society. I think we heard from the prof around how when it comes to human rights frameworks, when it comes to the convention, it's an opportunity to rethink some of these standards. And this requires us to look at it from the there are serious human rights implications. Thank you. And we are happy, and that's why we really welcome this opportunity. And it's great we have 3 excellent panelists to share with us. I want to, of course, to bear with us because we do have Dr. Petty. She's on the line with us. Are we? I think we've also heard throughout the day around how the transition is going to generate millions of jobs, but it's also going to cause potential disruption. And we heard from the prof how millions of Africans, as we see, lack complete social protection and social safety net. In fact, 80% of African households do not have any form of social safety net. What can governments, Dr. Petty, if you can hear me, and corporations to support people through this transition, if you are talking about a just transition to jobs in the green industry. And before you start, maybe just share a few words with us on your background. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, and good evening to at the University of Bradford. I host this from the perspective of women's experiences. Now, to the question that you've asked in terms of what governments can do and what businesses can do to protect human rights, if I got you correctly, within the context of the transition, one of the first things would be just to understand the ways in which the transition would impact on the rights of people. And this means we want to do especially people in vulnerable situations. And as we go through that process, it's also important for us to unpack what we mean by vulnerable people, and to recognize the fact that a lot of the times the vulnerability isn't necessarily because of people's lack of ability or people's lack of engagement or people's lack of enterprise, but very often it's due to systemic factors that are beyond the control of people. And so a lot of the times the vulnerability is as a result of the weaknesses in the system. So I think it's important for governments and for businesses to take that into account, recognize the ways in which the current systems puts practice, so that as we're transitioning, we are measuring what the impacts of the transition are, who's responsible.
Thank you, Dr. Petty. Thank you. Still continue. Also, I think telling us about how we need to address the root causes. And I think that will bring me, as we will call it, to responsibilities, to compel action. So you can't do these human rights assessment, environmental assessment impact assessments, and what are the legal and policy channels that exist for us, or recommendations that you can make to address, especially when we talk about affected communities.
Thank you very much. I would like to run as quickly as possible through this, as short of time. But as I have been trained by the Nigeria National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, we have to look at this from the global perspective, the African perspective, and our local perspective. Hottest year in history. On the African plane, let's look what's happening in the Sahel, the struggle for resources, what desertification is doing. They will bring it home to Nigeria. Let's look at the north, desertification. In the south oil pollution, environmental impact. In the south itself, there's a lot of deforestation going on due to illegal lumbering, So having looked at this, what can we do to protect the vulnerable, the society? Just as Prof has said earlier, the government intended to do this with a framework. Then the government itself decided not to do it. And this is contained in our constitution. Prof was actually speaking my mind, because the economic and social rights into which the environmental rights fell into are not non-justiciable. You cannot go to court to enforce them. They are contained in Chapter 2 of the Constitution. But Section 6 of the same Constitution says they are non-justiciable. The only thing you can enforce, or you can go to court for, is when there's oil pollution, for example, environmental pollution. And even at that, how difficult can that be? Just recently, I was in court for a community in the South, whose land has been polluted by an IOC for the past 20 years. Of course, when we go to court, it was back and forth, but eventually there was a judgment. And when that judgment was delivered, I looked at the judge, he looked me in the eye too, and he knew that we had betrayed our country. In the sense that a state law was used to limit the rights created under a federal law. That cannot be correct, that cannot be valid. So having said this, these are some of the issues. So the first step to take is to amend the Constitution, and I will crave the indulgence of Prof and myself to push for this. There are several constitutional amendments going on. We can present papers for that section only, the section to be, amended. Now, what's my recommendation and implementation strategy for this is for the Attorney General of the Federation to present a bill to the National Assembly for the amendment of that section of the Constitution.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kayode. Very powerful testimony of the inequalities between countries, but this panel really looking at inequalities in countries, in our countries. Before we give the floor, we would like to hear from...
Just like Dr. Kayode had mentioned, I think Prof just sort of looked at each of our notes and took all our ideas, and I was afraid for us to feel. But yes, to the question around, and I loved what Prof had said when he talked about it's not just human rights, it's developmental rights, right? The question is really how, if we don't want fossil fuel extraction era, now we're talking about green, those also create their own challenges. I think for me, it is when we talk about justice, what do we really mean by justice? Just to sort of boil it down to normal conversational languages. You know, sometimes when we speak here, we speak from our very academic standpoint and perspective. Justice really just, really means who are the people who get the benefit? Who are the people who bear the pain? Green transition or extraction without oil spillage. The decisions that are made for the communities, most community members are not in those rooms. And those are the sort of, when we draft projects, when we draft legislative agendas, right? So, I think it's something that's, historically and today it's consistently overlooked. People like women, young people who are in the community, and they really don't understand those solar panels were made, right? So these are just some conversation is yes, there. That's it from me.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you for taking us to the call. Before we give, I just wanted to touch upon this notion of development rights versus human rights. Mm-hmm. That for us, where we look at, and there's a UN Charter, environment, and that captures many of the other conventions that we have, the core human rights conventions. So I think it's really important that we don't have a discussion and have a collective right, certainly, but I think there is a recognition. Exactly. Thank you, Prof. I see that. Please also for any of our panelists, and even for Prof, I'm going to rope him into this discussion, but please, the floor is open.
Yeah, my question is, well, to everybody or anybody who wants to answer. You know, when we're talking about this transition, sorry, my name is, so when we're talking of this just energy transition, when we're talking of energy transition, there is this imperative that the transition has to be just. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. The lady on the left.
Ruth, R-U-T-H, yes.
Okay. Like Ruth said, we are in danger in Nigeria of falling along the lines of what happened with the oil industry in the Niger Delta, where those indigenous people who are in charge and who own the land are the ones impoverished as a result of the oil exploration. When it comes to energy transition, because in Nigeria now, it seems solar seems to be the biggest consensus that they feel is going to give the easiest one, although we've been using hydro for. And the question is, what is the condition of basic electricity in those areas? Because what we see often is the big wigs sit in Abuja, Lagos, in the cities deciding things. They make all the money, they get all the access to power and everything. And then the people who are suffering day to day are left still impoverished and even worse off than before you came to their land. So the question is, how are we ensuring that this time we do not repeat the problems of the past with fossil fuels, but now with the renewable things, using solar or wind or whichever way we decide to go? Thank you.
Before we give the floor, any other question? Maybe we take 2 or 3? Yeah. We take this one.
I just wanted to support what Dr. Kade said about, and this is a bit of a lawyer's thing, so forgive me if you're not a lawyer, but I get your point about justiciability and chapter 2 and chapter 5, and it is true. The general trend has been the chapter 2 rights, which we call economic and social rights, have been over the decades said that you cannot press them in courts to the point where they can be enforced. That is holding the state responsible. That's not me. Who's that? Okay, of the deprivation of your economic. It will be the easiest way, but I criticize rising to their occasion. Courts of law are courts of policy as much as law. Can you not know that when somebody comes to press a right that relates to environmental degradation, it is an economic, and are able to stay in an air-conditioned room, drive an air. Do you also feel that clarity rise to what is clearly a policy issue affecting the world? Whether you agree with that or not.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Titus. I was trying to, panelists have said, Prof, you said, and then maybe with, but I also know get to where we are now, getting possibly slip off from us or dropped with this awareness that is going around the world. Awareness that is going around the world. Look at the impact of losses. Thank you very much. Very much.
Yeah. And the private ones comes in the sense that.
So maybe starting with my lessons, especially from Prof.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lade's son, on the matter, because can rise above, make policy statements. Now for my prof about the people in the Niger Delta, the World Economic Forum says that by 2030, about 2.7 million jobs will be lost due to energy transition. However, 10.3 million jobs will be created by the transition. So that takes care of that. Now in Nigeria, the government is trying to implement the transition, but they have not put in place the policy, the legal and institutional framework to do that. And I'll give you an example. Look at the CNG issue. Government wanted to phase out use of petrol for people to use CNG, but where is the policy? Where is the law? The people were not carried along. It has to be bottom up. If you're going to make any policy, you must have the buy-in of the people. First of all, sensitization on the efficiency and the cost, on the safety of that energy you are introducing. All of these were not done. They only say, oh, we are moving to CNG. Of course, the IOCs are very formidable. We started hearing about cars blowing up because of CNG, and people were scared. Nobody wants to use it. It's dead on arrival. There has to be a bottom-up approach. The people must be carried along in policy, legal, and institutional establishment of this. So government, my recommendation is that government must come up with policy, laws, and the institution to protect by the transition. In Nigeria, okay, thank you very much, Prof. We are out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. So we can get a chance to everyone, but I'll come back to you, Ruth. Dr. Petty, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much for the questions and the feedback. I think I managed to get the first one by Professor Morocco Clark, and then I got the second one when Prof waded in about the justiciability question. So I'll just respond to both very briefly.
Maybe, Dr. Petty, you can also touch upon the third question around clarity on why we are where we are in terms of the frameworks when we were the first continent to recognize the right to development, and while we are here now. So maybe you can also touch upon that. That would be helpful.
All right. Thank you very much. So if I were to start with why we are where we are, just to give a bit of feedback on that, I think it's a mix of issues. We have our own contextual issues in terms of the politics of it, because whether we like it or not, a lot of the decisions around environmental governance is very closely linked to politics. So if we think back to, for instance, all the debates around the water bill, when we're going to have a new Water Act passed for Nigeria, we know all that went down with that. So I think a lot of the times environmental governance is very deeply entrenched with politics, and we have to just own it so that we can also respond to it appropriately. And then the other thing is there's a lot of influence of the global system on national systems. And this is both in terms of funding, but also in terms of just thought leadership. I think that even though at the regional level we have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which has this profound recognition of the right to development and the links to the rights of people and the right to a healthy environment as well, we haven't seen that really trickling down at the national level. So at the national level, we don't see countries across the continent being as forward-thinking or as proactive when it comes to the rights to environment. Of course, we have some African countries that have now recognized the rights of nature, so that's the good development, but it's just not a widespread practice. And linked to that, the question of how do we ensure that we're not making the same mistakes as we've made with oil and gas. I think it still comes down to that question of we need to define for ourselves as a continent, what does this transition really mean? And what does it mean for our peoples? What does it mean for our sectors? What does it mean for various aspects of our lives as a people? And this is really important because there's a lot of conversation around climate finance, for instance, loss and damages. But the question is, do we really know what the loss and damages is for? Whether it's in Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, various African countries, have we sat down to really think about what it means for us when we say that we have loss and damage claims? What does it mean? If we're losing our forests, our biodiversity, what does that mean? Are we waiting to be told what it means? Or do we have a way of actually quantifying it by our own standards? Because we also need to be mindful that what the environment means for the African continent may not exactly be the same thing as what it means for Europe or what it means for South America. Within the African context, there's a lot of culture that's embedded in our relationship with nature. There's a lot of other values that go beyond just industry and the use of natural resources for production. So we need to be able to, as a people, think through it. What does this mean for us? How do we quantify it, not just in economic terms, but also in spiritual terms, in historical terms, in political terms, cultural terms? So for instance, sometimes we're in some spaces and people talk about the fact that we need to be going to plant-based diets as a way of responding to sustainability issues. That's great, but what does that mean for our cultural practices? So I think we need to get to that point where we understand the impact of the transition on us as a people, on our culture, on our history, and other values that are intrinsically African, whatever that means for us as a people. And we need to be able to just define the discourse rather than wait to be told what needs to happen. And then, we're very often very many steps behind. And I think that's something we need to address so that we don't repeat the same mistakes that we've made with oil and gas. As to the justiciability question, I think I would also like to just suggest that beyond thinking about what Section 6 says and Chapter 2 and all that, we probably haven't, in many cases, I think we haven't really explored the opportunities which national laws themselves present for enforcement. Because if we take the Climate Change Act, for instance, there are lots of provisions in that act which I think haven't been enforced yet. What have we done about it? It's been how many years now? We should have gone past the stage of celebrating the fact that Nigeria has a Climate Change Act. So actually unpacking it and saying, what does this act provide in terms of the responsibilities of the council and various other arms of government? And are these provisions actually being enforced? And if not, should we be holding the government to account? Should we be holding the various agencies to account? So the point I'm trying to make here is, yes, there's a justiciability question, but there's also been a lot of advancements in terms of opportunities for enforcing government's obligations, whether drawing from international law or even regional laws as well as national law. So let us look through our current framework of laws and policies, even in the Nigerian context and any other African context. Let's look at what we have and let us ask ourselves, have we actually exhausted the opportunities which our current legal and policy frameworks provide? And I think in that, if we do that, the justiciability question may not really be that much of a stumbling block, because we've seen it with education, for instance, the right to basic education. It's there because it's in law. So even though it may be, in chapter 2, there could be other ways of actually getting enforcement or enforceability. And this could be just as simple as looking at existing legal frameworks, the provisions that are there, the responsibilities of government, and holding the government to account on that. And finally, I think awareness, we cannot say enough about the need for awareness, because if people don't even realize that they have a right to something, then there will be no motivation for them to hold the government accountable. So we need to do a lot of awareness raising in terms of opportunities for people to understand what their rights are, what the current legal frameworks provide for. And if there are gaps, then of course we need to go down the route of legal reforms. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Petty. I hope you can hear the clap from the room. That was a very comprehensive response. And then we come back to Ruth, and I think we come back to you to really look at the core of the issue. Communities, people affected the most. How do we place them at the center? What does right-based approach means in this context? And any other questions you wish to address?
Yes, I think that I'm going to start with the question that Professor Clark Morocco had directed to me, which is what are the policies or what are the actions that we need to take so that we don't reinforce we don't repeat the issues that we had with the oil era and all that. I think it's very unfortunate that we should have learned from this, because I don't think it's different. It's the same extravagant procedure. So what drives renewable energy, for example, before we even start talking about solar panels, it is the rare earth metal extraction, it is the extraction of lithium, or lithium particularly, because those are like the key drivers. And we have those extraction already happening in very neighboring states here, Nasarawa already. And there are already environmental issues that are coming up in terms of, in those extraction region, but there are no legal provisions for those communities to actually step up, right? So I think that we should have learned from that to then be able to get ahead of these conversations. But I think one of the panels earlier had talked about how communities do not even know how to band together to ensure that they are putting their rights out there. And I think that's the gap that the NGO should fill, all right, to help communities design accountability frameworks that covers their social, their community, like Dr. Paddy said, their spiritual. What does it mean for them? Because what certain rights of development mean for people in the northern part of Nigeria would be different from the southern part of Nigeria, because of course we all know that Nigeria is a very diverse country. So I think that communities need to start being empowered to draft accountability frameworks that is from them, not something has been globally handed over to them. And I had said I was going to also address something that Prof had said about the Paris Agreement. I think that there's something about how we need to distill international ideas and frameworks into what it really means for us contextually here in Nigeria, here in Africa. And if we are not in those rooms most of the time anyways, we are not in those rooms where, for example, Paris Agreements are made, or some people who are there are not, their reality is not reflective of the ordinary Nigerian. You can be Nigerian, having a Nigerian name, but you've been born abroad all the while, and then, you just have that name. I'm not saying that you're not Nigerian, but in terms of the cultural imprint and reality and pulse and feel of what a Nigerian is, those things are probably lost on those individuals that represent us. So I think when they make those agreements, we go there, we sign those things. Why? Because we need the grants. Because we need the grants. Sometimes we are on a chokehold in these conversations. And if we are hungry, we need to actually collect the money, sign the whatever it is, and so we keep it moving, right? So I think that those are the places where the issues are most felt. And I think again is the issues around the social reflection of when we talk about environmental assessment. So environmental assessment, I don't think should only be done at the beginning of a project. I think it also should be done at the middle of the project, because sometimes we really don't understand what the implication of, for example, having solar panels installed in our communities look like. There are issues with solar panels in countries that have, as beautiful as renewable energy is, it also comes with its double-edged sword. Right? So what are those issues? How does it reflect? Because what happens, for example, in the US when it comes to solar panels might not happen in Nigeria. So how do we do that impact assessment in terms of health? And again, it shouldn't be the companies that are responsible that should send their consultants to do those assessments, right? It should be the community who should, appoint a representative that does those assessments that they submit to either the government or the companies on what the issues are. So I think that these are just some of the things that we can do to sort of center the community in, these transition move that we are in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And I think that brings us to the conclusion of our panel. A lot has been said. I would not obviously try and summarize, but I think what we are taking away among the many things is the need for contextualizing it too, whether it's at the national level or even within countries, within Nigeria. And what does it mean for us when we talk about just transition? And I think when you mentioned this really then makes this African Climate Forum so important, that we have this space to really it's so important that we have a space as Africans, which has been offered by the Climate Forum, to really discuss some of these many issues. We also heard about the importance of both, even in joining us online and being so engaging, even though she's not in the room with us. So before we go, a round of applause for their contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Photograph with Professor Nwagu. All that is going on. I will just thank everybody, particularly those who have been here. We had the opening ceremony of the 2025 special eminent Nigerians attend, and we also had some members of we had our Minister of Trade. 4 plenary sessions. We also looked at, we'll be here bright and early tomorrow to take the more exciting. I will ask, it's a slow motion in crisis. I don't know if I got that right. Slow motion in crisis, something like that. That's what climate issues are. So let's do what we can. So, Prof, we have to do this movie this year. We have to. We can't be. I'm going to personally pursue this one with you. I'm bypassing every protocol. I'm seeing you directly now. Exactly.